If your Mercedes dies before 100,000 miles, there is a good chance you killed it. Not with one catastrophic mistake. With every cold launch, stretched oil change, ignored leak, and repair you decided could wait. That is how a luxury car quietly becomes a financial nightmare. Most Mercedes engines can travel beyond 200,000 miles, yet these 11 habits cut many of them down before reaching half that distance. Number 1 is especially dangerous because owners mistake it for saving money. By the time they discover the truth, the damage is already done. Let us begin. Number 11. Ignoring the warm-up period. The engine starts. The cabin lights glow. The 3-pointed star appears ahead of you, and the car sounds perfectly normal. That is exactly when many owners make their first expensive mistake. They select drive, pull onto the road, and immediately press hard into the accelerator. The turbo builds boost. The transmission changes quickly. The engine climbs through the rev range before the oil has properly reached every surface it must protect. A cold Mercedes engine is not automatically fragile. It is simply not ready for full load. Engine oil becomes thicker when cold. During the first moments after starting, the oil pump must move that oil through narrow passages to bearings, camshafts, timing components, turbocharger bearings, and other fast-moving parts. Modern synthetic oils flow much better than older oils, but temperature still matters. Think of cold oil like honey from a refrigerator. It moves, but just not as freely as it does when warm. Here is where many owners get fooled. The coolant gauge begins rising, so they assume the entire car is ready. It is not. Coolant warms relatively quickly. Engine oil, transmission fluid, and other drivetrain components can still be far below their ideal working temperature. This does not mean leaving the Mercedes idling on the driveway for 20 minutes. Long idling wastes fuel, warms the drivetrain slowly, and does little for the transmission or differential. The smarter method is simple: start the engine. Allow a brief moment for the idle to settle, then drive gently. Use light throttle. Keep engine speed moderate. Avoid full boost, hard launches, and aggressive overtaking until the car has traveled for several minutes and the fluids have warmed under light load. This matters even more on turbocharged Mercedes engines. A turbocharger can spin at extraordinary speed. Ask it for maximum boost while cold, and those bearings are forced to work before the oil protecting them is fully ready. Mercedes specialists see the result later. A turbo begins whining. Oil consumption rises. A faint rattle appears on cold starts. The owner blames the car. The real damage began every morning at the end of the driveway. Warm the car by driving it gently. Do not punish it while it is still waking up. That habit alone can add years to the life of the engine and turbocharger. Most owners think cold starts are the biggest danger. The next mistake keeps damaging the engine long after it is warm. Number 10. Following the maximum oil change. Interval. Your Mercedes says service is not due yet. The oil warning is absent. The engine sounds smooth. The digital service counter still shows thousands of miles remaining. So why spend money early? That question has destroyed more engines than many owners realize. Short journeys are especially punishing. The engine may never remain hot long enough to evaporate fuel dilution and condensation. Stop-start traffic creates repeated heat cycles. Long idling adds running time without adding much mileage. Hard acceleration raises oil temperature. Extended motorway driving can be easier on oil than 5 miles of cold urban driving every morning. This is why treating the maximum possible interval as a target is dangerous. Some owners hear that modern synthetic oil can last close to 20,000 miles under certain service systems. They assume every Mercedes, every engine, and every driving pattern can safely stretch that far. That is the trap. Oil is not simply something that makes metal slippery. It is the blood of the engine. It cools, it cleans, it protects. It carries contamination away from components moving thousands of times every minute. Once that blood becomes old and dirty, every moving part starts paying the price. Sludge does not appear overnight. First comes a thin varnish, then sticky deposits begin forming in places the owner never sees. Oil control rings start gumming up, small galleries narrow, chain tensioners respond more slowly, turbo oil feeds become restricted. Then comes the cold start rattle. At first, it lasts half a second. The owner ignores it because the engine becomes quiet immediately. A few months later, it lasts longer. Timing components wear. Camshaft faults appear. What looked like a harmless attempt to save money becomes a repair involving chains, guides, tensioners, or camshaft adjusters. Ask any independent Mercedes technician what destroys timing components. Long oil intervals will be near the top of the list. The correct interval depends on the exact engine, model year, oil specification, driving conditions, and manufacturer schedule. Never guess. Check the manual, use the correct Mercedes-approved oil specification, discuss a sensible interval with a qualified specialist who understands how the vehicle is actually used. For an owner planning to keep the car beyond 100,000 miles, changing oil earlier than the longest permitted interval is cheap insurance. Saving one oil service means nothing if the engine later demands a timing chain repair. Yet old oil is only half the danger. If you are discovering valuable lessons in this video, make sure you subscribe now and hit the notification bell. The next mistake looks harmless, costs almost nothing to avoid, and can keep dirty oil circulating through your Mercedes without a single warning light. Number 9. Buying cheap oil. Filters. An oil filter looks simple from the outside. A metal canister, a paper element, a rubber seal. That makes it tempting to buy the cheapest one available, especially when two filters appear identical in photographs. They are not always identical inside. A proper oil filter has one job that sounds simple: catch damaging particles without starving the engine of oil. Doing that properly takes quality materials, accurate construction, and enough filter area to handle repeated heat cycles. Cheap filters often cut corners where owners cannot see them. Here is what actually happens. The filter becomes restrictive. A bypass valve opens so the engine still receives oil. That prevents immediate oil starvation. The problem is that poorly filtered oil can now continue moving through bearings, camshaft surfaces, timing components, and turbocharger oil passages. The driver notices nothing. No warning light, no new sound, no loss of power. Just microscopic damage repeating mile after mile. A weak filter can also allow oil to drain away from areas that should remain primed after shutdown. The next time the engine starts, oil pressure takes longer to build. Those first dry-sounding seconds matter. Repeat them hundreds of times and the wear begins adding up. A Mercedes specialist once opened a bargain filter removed during a routine service. The media had twisted inside the housing. The owner had saved less than the cost of lunch. That saving had been protecting an engine worth thousands. Use a genuine or high-quality filter from a reputable manufacturer. Confirm the correct fitment for the exact engine. Do not trust a vague online listing that says one filter fits half the Mercedes range. Fresh oil and a proper filter work as a team. Compromise the filter, and you compromise the entire service. Still, even neglected engine oil is not the most expensive fluid mistake. The next habit can destroy a transmission that is shifting perfectly today. Number 8. Delaying transmission service. The transmission feels perfect. Changes are smooth. There is no warning light. The selector moves instantly into drive. That is when owners are most likely to believe the fluid can be ignored. The phrase lifetime fluid has caused enormous confusion. Owners hear it and imagine transmission fluid that remains fresh for the entire life of the car. No matter the mileage, no matter the heat, no matter the traffic, no matter the age, no fluid works that way. Transmission fluid has a brutal job. It lubricates gears and bearings. It operates hydraulic systems. It carries heat away. It helps clutches engage smoothly. Every journey adds heat, pressure, and microscopic wear material. The fluid slowly darkens. Its additives weaken. The filter collects debris. Yet the gearbox can continue shifting smoothly while all of this is happening. That is what makes the mistake so dangerous. Waiting for harsh changes means waiting for the transmission to complain after wear has already begun. Different Mercedes transmissions have different requirements. Fluid type, filter design, sump arrangement, filling temperature, and service interval can vary dramatically. Some units require specialized procedures and diagnostic temperature monitoring. This is not a job for universal fluid and guesswork. The important point is not one mileage figure for every car. The important point is identifying the exact gearbox and servicing it before symptoms appear. A proper service can include approved fluid, a filter, sump gasket, new fasteners where specified, leak inspection, and diagnostic checks where appropriate. Avoid the opposite mistake too. Aggressively flushing a neglected high-mileage transmission without first assessing its condition can create problems. A gearbox with no service records needs evaluation by someone who understands that transmission. Transmission fluid is cheaper than transmission hardware. If you want your Mercedes to survive beyond 100,000 miles, subscribe now. This channel exposes the small ownership habits that become enormous repair bills. The next mistake often starts with nothing more than a smell. Ignore it, and a cheap seal can take expensive parts down with it. Number 7. Ignoring small oil. Leaks. A faint burning smell reaches the cabin. You open the bonnet and see a damp patch around the top of the engine. Nothing is pouring onto the ground. The oil level has barely moved. It does not feel urgent. That is exactly why it becomes expensive. Mercedes engines can develop leaks from valve cover gaskets, oil filter housings, oil cooler seals, breather systems, timing covers, turbo oil lines, vacuum pumps, and other sealing points. The exact weak spots depend on the engine. The dangerous habit is not having a leak, it is knowing about the leak and deciding to live with it. Owners often tell themselves topping up oil is cheaper than fixing the source. That logic lasts until the oil reaches something it should never touch. On some Mercedes engines, leaking oil can enter electrical connectors or wiring. Once that happens, contamination can travel through the harness and turn a straightforward seal repair into an electrical nightmare. A leak near the front of the engine is especially dangerous. Oil reaches the auxiliary belt. The belt swells, it slips, it begins shredding. Fragments then travel into areas where they create much larger damage. This is how a repair costing around 100 pounds in parts and straightforward labor turns into a bill approaching 2,000 pounds or more. A Mercedes technician once showed an owner a belt that had become soft from oil contamination. The owner had ignored the leak for months because the driveway remained clean. The belt failed days before it was due to be repaired. Check the oil level correctly and regularly. Some Mercedes models use electronic measurement rather than a traditional dipstick. Follow the correct procedure. Park on level ground. Do not overfill the engine after discovering a leak. Too much oil creates another set of problems, including foaming, crankcase pressure, intake contamination, and catalyst damage. The cheapest leak is the one repaired before it damages everything around it. Oil attacks from the outside. The next mistake starts inside the combustion chamber and quietly poisons injectors, turbos, and emission systems. Number 6. Using low-quality fuel. Most drivers assume all fuel does the same job. That belief lasts until the engine begins hesitating, fuel economy drops, or the warning light appears. Mercedes engines are designed around specific fuel requirements. The correct octane or cetane rating is not a marketing suggestion. It supports proper combustion, performance, emissions control, and protection against knock. Low quality, contaminated, or incorrectly rated fuel creates problems quietly. Deposits change injector spray patterns. Instead of a fine, controlled mist, the injector delivers uneven fuel. Combustion becomes less efficient. In petrol engines, insufficient octane encourages knock. The computer pulls ignition timing to protect the engine. The driver may not hear anything. The car simply becomes slower and less efficient while the system constantly fights the fuel inside the tank. That is not a longevity strategy. In diesel systems, water or contamination can destroy high-pressure pumps and injectors built to incredibly fine tolerances. Those repairs can cost thousands. One owner blamed his turbo after the car lost power. The workshop found badly contaminated injectors and a heavily loaded emission system. The turbo was not the first problem. It was the next victim. Use fuel that meets the specification in the manual. Buy from busy, reputable stations. Keep receipts when practical, especially after unusual running begins. Avoid constantly driving with the tank nearly empty. On many designs, fuel helps cool the pump. Cheap fuel can become very expensive once injectors, pumps, turbos, and emission systems begin sending separate bills. Most engine damage at least stays beneath the bonnet. The next mistake can change how the entire car steers, brakes, and sits on the road. Number 5. Ignoring suspension. Noises. Mercedes cabins are designed to isolate you from the road. That refinement creates a trap. When a faint knock finally reaches the driver's seat, something underneath may already have been moving for weeks. At first, it only happens over one particular bump, and then it appears during braking. Eventually, the sound becomes part of the car. The owner stops noticing it. One worn component then starts punishing the next. A failing control arm bushing changes alignment under braking. Tires begin wearing unevenly. Steering becomes vague. The car starts pulling. A relatively ordinary suspension repair is now joined by the cost of tires and alignment. Ball joint play is more serious. What begins as a clunk can progress towards dangerous loss of control if the joint fails. Here's the scary part. A Mercedes can still feel stable while that wear is developing. The suspension hides its own decline. Air suspension models add another risk. A car sitting lower at one corner after parking can have a leaking air, spring, line, valve block, or related fault. Ignore it, and the compressor must run longer every time the car wakes up. The owner could have replaced one leaking component. Instead, the overworked compressor fails too. Mercedes specialists see cars arrive leaning to one side after the owner ignored the overnight drop for months. The first symptom was visual. The final bill was mechanical. Do not let anyone replace suspension parts purely from a sound description. Proper diagnosis requires checking for play, damaged rubber, leaks, broken springs, and correct ride height. A Mercedes can feel composed while hiding serious wear. The chassis whispers before it shouts. It gets worse. The next fluid can look clean, sit at the correct level, and still be quietly attacking one of the most expensive safety systems on the car. Number 4, skipping brake, fluid changes. The brake pedal feels normal. The reservoir is full. Why replace fluid that has not disappeared? Because brake fluid ages even when the car barely moves. It absorbs moisture. That moisture lowers the fluid's resistance to boiling. Under repeated braking, mountain driving, towing, or emergency stops, heat becomes intense. Contaminated fluid can begin forming vapor. The pedal softens, braking performance fades. That is when an invisible maintenance shortcut becomes a safety problem. The danger is not limited to pedal feel. Moisture also encourages internal corrosion. Modern Mercedes braking systems contain costly pumps, valves, hydraulic components, and electronic control. Corrosion develops in places no owner can inspect from the driveway. A scheduled fluid change is simple. Replacing an anti-lock braking hydraulic unit is not. This is why a Mercedes driven only at weekends still needs brake fluid service according to time, not only distance. Age matters. Moisture does not care how few miles appeared on the odometer. Any change in pedal feel needs immediate attention. The same applies to unexplained fluid loss, brake warnings, or wetness around the wheels. Brake fluid does not simply vanish. A luxury badge cannot overcome neglected hydraulics. If this countdown has changed one habit already, press like and tell us in the comments how many miles your Mercedes has covered. The highest mileage owner may prove the point of this entire video. The final 3 mistakes are where ordinary neglect becomes electrical chaos, false diagnoses, and catastrophic repair bills. Number 3. Waiting for dashboard. Warning lights. No warning light means no problem. That is one of the most expensive assumptions a Mercedes owner can make. Dashboard warnings are useful. They are not fortune tellers. Many systems only trigger a message after a sensor reading moves outside an expected range, a fault repeats, or wear reaches a detectable threshold. By then, the problem has often been developing for months. A timing component becomes noisy before camshaft correlation moves far enough to store a fault. A coolant seep evaporates on a hot engine before the level falls enough to trigger a warning. A suspension joint develops play without any electronic sensor noticing. Transmission fluid becomes contaminated while the gearbox continues shifting within programmed limits. Sensors only report what they can measure. They cannot inspect a cracked bushing. They cannot smell burning oil. They cannot feel a rough bearing. They cannot notice that one tire is wearing through its inner edge. Preventive inspection fills that gap. Here's where many owners make another mistake. They buy a cheap scanner, read one fault code, and immediately replace the component named on the screen. A fault code is a clue. It is not a diagnosis. The technician still needs to test the system, inspect wiring, review live data, and confirm the actual cause. One owner continued driving because an intermittent coolant message disappeared after every restart. The warning never stayed long enough to frighten him. The leak continued. The engine eventually overheated. The warning had spoken. The owner simply waited for it to shout. Do not wait for a permanent red message before becoming interested in the health of the car. By then, the inexpensive window can already be closing. The next mistake creates something even more confusing. One weak component can make half the car appear broken at once. Number 2. Ignoring battery. Emery Health. Your Mercedes starts, so the battery must be healthy. Not necessarily. A battery can still crank the engine while struggling to maintain stable voltage during starting, cold weather, or heavy electrical demand. Modern Mercedes cars depend on clean, consistent voltage. Control units manage the engine, transmission, braking, steering assistance, restraint systems, lighting, infotainment, comfort features, driver assistance, and communication between modules. When voltage drops, the car can behave as though several unrelated systems have failed at the same time. Warnings appear for anti-lock braking. Stability control complains. Steering assistance reports a fault. Parking sensors disappear. The transmission enters a protective mode. Windows lose their normal settings. Stop-start becomes unavailable. The infotainment system restarts. The electronic parking brake suddenly joins the argument. Owners panic. They begin replacing sensors. Sometimes the true problem is a weak main battery, failing auxiliary battery, poor connection, damaged ground strap, or charging fault. Low voltage does not make every warning false. That is why diagnosis matters. The mistake is waiting until the battery refuses to start the car before testing it. Mercedes workshops regularly see cars with multiple warning lights after an incorrect battery replacement. The owner thought the expensive electronics had failed. The car had simply been given the wrong electrical foundation. The battery is not merely the part that starts the engine, it is the electrical foundation beneath the entire car. Now we reach the habit that connects every failure in this countdown. Number 1. Servicing only. When something breaks, the car drives well today. That sentence has sent countless Mercedes vehicles to an early grave. Reactive owners wait for a warning light, loud noise, fluid puddle, breakdown, or failed inspection before spending money. Preventive owners act while the symptoms are still quiet, cheap, and reversible. That difference determines whether a Mercedes reaches 100,000 miles exhausted or passes 200,000 miles with confidence. Old oil damages timing components and turbochargers. A small leak destroys a belt. A weak battery creates electrical confusion. A worn bushing ruins a tire. A leaking air spring kills a compressor. Old transmission fluid accelerates internal wear. Moisture-filled brake fluid threatens costly hydraulic parts. None of these failures begins with a dramatic explosion. They begin with permission. The owner hears a rattle and permits it to continue. The owner sees oil dampness and permits it to spread. The owner notices slow cranking and permits voltage to fall further. The owner feels a rough shift and permits contaminated fluid to remain. Servicing only when something breaks feels cheaper because preventive maintenance produces no dramatic result. You pay money, you collect the car. It drives almost exactly as it did before. That is the success. Fresh transmission fluid does not create a thrilling transformation when the gearbox was still healthy. A new bushing may only remove a movement most people barely noticed. A fresh battery may simply prevent warning lights that had not appeared yet. Preventive maintenance pays you in failures that never happen. This is why cheap used Mercedes cars become dangerous. The purchase price falls. The engineering complexity does not. A buyer sees a luxury car for the price of an ordinary hatchback. 6 months later, the delayed maintenance arrives all at once. Oil leaks, worn suspension, old transmission fluid, weak battery, neglected brakes. Suddenly, the affordable Mercedes becomes the most expensive car they have ever owned. Use the right specialist. A general workshop may be excellent. Complex Mercedes diagnosis still benefits from technicians who understand model-specific engines, transmissions, electronic architecture, service procedures, and recurring failure points. Budget for ownership before the warning lights arrive. Set aside money every month for servicing and repairs. A premium car bought cheaply remains a premium car to maintain. The price on the windscreen can fall. The cost of the parts underneath it does not. Most importantly, stop treating 100,000 miles as the finish line. Mileage is not a death sentence. A neglected Mercedes with 60,000 miles can be a greater risk than a carefully maintained example with twice that distance. The odometer tells you how far the car has traveled. The service history tells you how it traveled. That is why servicing only after something breaks is the #1 mistake. Every earlier habit survives because of it. Cold engine abuse continues because there is no immediate failure. Oil intervals stretch because the engine remains quiet. Leaks spread because the oil level still looks acceptable. Battery voltage falls because the car still starts. Suspension wear continues because the knock only happens occasionally. Transmission fluid remains untouched because the changes still feel smooth. By the time each problem becomes impossible to ignore, the inexpensive window has closed. A Mercedes does not need luck to pass 200,000 miles. It needs correct oil, clean filters, healthy fluids, stable voltage, early inspections, careful warm-up, quality parts. It needs an owner who responds to whispers rather than waiting for screams. That is how you stop an expensive car from becoming an expensive lesson. A Mercedes does not care how expensive it was when it left the factory. It only remembers how you have treated it since. Ignore the whispers and 100,000 miles becomes the finish line. Respond early, use the correct parts and fluids, and maintain the car before it demands attention, and 100,000 miles can become the halfway point. Which of these mistakes have you been making? Tell us in the comments. Then click the next video on your screen to discover the Mercedes warning signs owners notice far too late. Subscribe for more Mercedes maintenance secrets, costly mistakes, and ownership advice. Thanks for watching.